Bienvenidos a Cultura, yo soy Bianca Solis. This summer was the 150th anniversary of the peace treaty signed in Fort Sumner establishing the Navajo Nation. Thousands of people died during these 5 years, which is commonly referred to as the Long Walk to Bosque Redondo. Later, I'll be sitting down with Aaron Roth, the historic site manager in Fort Sumner. But first, Jordan Honeycutt was there in June to bring you the story.
On June 8th, the Fort Sumner Museum commemorated the 150th anniversary of the peace treaty between the Navajo Nation and the United States government. For many, the story behind the Long Walk and what happened at Bosque Redondo remains masked in oral history and in the shadow of Billy the Kid's grave. Many gathered in the sweltering heat to listen to a diverse lineup of speakers, which began with Veronica Gonzalez from the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs.
This treaty ended the forced internment of Navajos and Mescalero Apaches at the Bosque Redondo Reservation, allowing them to return to their homelands. The sovereignty of the Navajo Nation was thus established, and the period of history from 1863 to 1868, commonly known as the Long Walk, was effectively ended. The U.S. Army had forcibly removed 9,500 Dene and 500 Mescalero Apaches from their homelands and made them walk over 400 miles for an internment camp known as the Bosque Redondo Reservation. Though considered prisoners of war, many were in fact elders, women, and children. It is estimated that a total of over 2,000 people died during the arduous walk here.
For many, the museum opens up new questions and can be a difficult place to learn about the past. Emmett Curley explains the healing process of coming to terms with his ancestors' history.
The first time that I heard of Huelte, or the Long Walk, or the internment here, I felt really negative emotions to the point of, I would say, hatred of the Europeans that had come over. Then I thought, if that hadn't occurred, if my great-grandmother hadn't been born through the actions of this military personnel, rape, abuse, whatever, I would not be here. So in some respect, I have to owe thanks to the fact what happened here. So to me, in my mind, it brought me to the point of where there was a contradictory position that it put me in. One was that I should be grateful and that I should embrace and accept that perspective and that respect, and then I should also embrace my indigenous cultural heritage. Maybe that's what the Creator's plan was to begin with, and we just didn't understand.
The commemoration brought people from around the country who were entertained by traditional song and dances. Kitty Weaver, a descendant of Colonel Tappan, found the treaty as she did research for his autobiography. She made several trips to the Bosque Memorial Site and helped to bring the treaty back to Fort Sumner.
Okay, the treaty was up in the attic of Tappan's house where he left his papers. I think my grandfather knew about the treaty, but I never heard him talk about it. And then it came down to my mother, and I think she did more reading of Tappan's papers, and she certainly knew about the treaty. And then I inherited the whole collection in 1975. And I think I knew about it, but I'd never paid much attention to it. It was a document that was within Tappan's other papers. I knew it was important, but it remained in the collection. And it's been there, and it's traveled with me when we moved. And nobody paid much attention to it until this year, with the 150th anniversary, when people were wondering what happened to the third copy. I was advised to take the treaty to a document center in Massachusetts to have it preserved in order to be displayed. So it was there for 6 weeks, undergoing preservation, and then it came out here for this 150th anniversary. Well, I have to say that being here has become quite emotional for me, because before it was a document. I knew the importance of the document, but not the emotional feelings that go along with it. And that's what I've learned since I've been here, how important it is, especially seeing people look at it for the first time.
After the commemoration, members of the community walked in honor of the thousands who lost their lives and took time to reflect on the past. Jordan Honeycutt reporting.
Recently, I sat down with Aaron Roth at the Fort Sumner Museum to discuss the history and significance of the logbook to Bosque Redondo, along with the recent discovery of the third copy of the treaty. Aaron, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Bianca, for having me.
Alrighty, can you give us a brief history of El Bosque Redondo?
It's hard to summarize in words what it was or what it came to be, but basically this area was selected in 1862 as the site for Fort Sumner. Fort Sumner then became this holding place for over 9,000 Navajo and Mescalero Apache people. It essentially was a concentration camp for multiple cultures, people that were deemed as, in the way of Western expansion, and also, there was a lot of problems with, when newcomers were coming to the West, you had things like, the Homestead Act of 1862, which basically said people coming from the East could have a parcel of land up to 160 acres as long as you maintained that land, improved upon it. So a lot of times people would come and they would stake their claim, and then they would write back that they were being attacked by different native groups. Well, the native groups that were selected as the most interfering with this process were the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache. So they were rounded up by the hundreds, by the thousands, and marched here on. The Navajo were marched 53 different times, varying from 50 people marching at once up to 1,000 people marching at once. And Mescalero Apache, they were actually the first to be brought here, which is often a little-known fact in history. And there were about 500 in total brought here. And they were first told that this land is going to be your land to farm, even though the Mescalero Apache were not farmers. It was very much against their culture. They were hunter-gatherers. They traveled from place to place, very nomadic. And months later, in September of 1863, was when the first group of Navajo arrived here, the enemy of the Mescalero Apache. So there was cultural tension to begin with, but then adding another group on top of that just added even more cultural tension. Fortunately, though, as time went on, the people began to realize that they were not the enemies of each other. Survival was the true enemy here, because there was never enough. This place was so withdrawn from every other community that there was just never enough of anything. And, I think about when this place was first established. The general in command, General James H. Carleton, he selected this location. He sent a board of officers here in 1862 to pick the specific location of the fort. And the board of officers actually wrote back, and they said, this would not be a good place for a fort. It's prone to flooding. There's no rock for mortar. There's very few trees. Even though the name Bosque Redondo, it's like round wooded area. It was named that for the cottonwood trees. There was very few trees. And, the water is very alkaline, and they said it's not very serviceable by other forts. They actually suggested where present-day Santa Rosa is to put the fort because of the natural lakes, and there was a confluence of two rivers. But the general wrote back and said, well, the idea is not to bring people closer together, it's for isolation. Now get to work. And so it became Fort Sumner. And the people endured from 1863 was when the first group arrived here until 1868, June.
So then this was also known as Navajo Long Walk. So what ended this march?
The military did not have a full understanding of how many people were in the tribe. They thought maybe there were 3,000 people at most between both tribes. So when you read through the archives, you see a letter that says, 3,000 are here, we have everyone. Months later, 4,000 are here, we have everyone. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. And finally they got to around 8,500 Navajo people and they said, we have everyone. And they just stopped. So it was December of 1866 was when the last group of people arrived here. And that is what ended the long walk.
And an estimated how many Native American lives were lost during this march?
Between the marches and the actual stay here, it's estimated around 3,000, but that's a conservative estimate. That's based upon records from the military, but in going through those records, a lot of it was underreported because deaths around here, there was a big taboo in going to the hospital because a hospital was a place essentially where you went to die. And the Navajo, both the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache, don't go where people go to die or go where somebody has died. So if you knew that, you didn't go to the hospital. So if you died off on the reservation, nobody reported it.
You weren't accounted for.
That's right.
Alrighty, so we know that this ended in a treaty, and it's very significant because only 3 treaties are known. Can you tell us about each one and their importance?
So the treaty was signed on the morning of June 1st, 1868. And this actually marks the 150th year of the signing of that treaty. And according to the records, there were 3 copies that were laid out on the table. And one copy was referred to as the Washington copy, and it was taken express courier to Washington, D.C. to be looked at by the President, Andrew Johnson, and it was ratified by Congress and the Senate. Well, this copy, the Washington copy, was signed by all of the chiefs and headmen, all of the witnesses, and by the Peace Commission. So it was signed by everyone who was there. A second copy was signed, and that is referred to as the Navajo copy. That went back to Navajo Nation at the conclusion of the signing of the treaty. It was given to Chief Barboncito, but there really wasn't an understanding about where it went since that time. Some say that it could be in a box somewhere, but one of the most popular oral histories states that it was buried with Barboncito at the time of his passing. Now, the third copy is referred to as the Peace Commissioner's copy. Now, what's interesting about this copy is it wasn't signed by the Peace Commission. There's just a blank space where their signatures should have been. Now, why this is, I'm not entirely sure, but this particular copy was then to accompany the Peace Commission and was supposed to be filed away back in Washington, but it never made it. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure either. And there's a lot of interesting pieces to this history. But ultimately, the Peace Commissioner's copy we were made aware of in recent history. I've been corresponding with his Samuel F. Tappan's living relative, Ms. Claire Weaver, also known as Kitty Weaver. And she lives in Manchester, Massachusetts, and she actually lives in Tappan's former home. And I've been corresponding with her since September of 2015, And she's been writing this biography about Tappan's life, and I've been trying to fill in the holes for her, as best as I can, because I'm not a Tappan historian, but I feel like I've become a Tappan historian. And, we've been writing to each other, and she's been out here at least once since that time. And, just in conversations, leading up to this 150th, a lot of people have been asking, well, where's that third copy? Where did the other copies go? We have the Washington copy. Washington copy's been held at the National Archives for many, many years. Where did the other two copies go? Well, in a conversation with Kitty recently, she says, I do have the third copy. I'm just kind of blown away. I said, wow. Yeah, that's really all I can muster is, wow. And she said it was basically found in a wooden trunk full of Tappan's old documents, including like the proceedings leading up to the signing of the treaty, all the notes that he took.
So after a tragedy like this, like the Long Walk, how do we as a people make something like this right?
That's a very good question. I think one of the most important things that you can do is provide those that were hurt by this trauma a voice. Because looking back on the way we interpret this history, it wasn't the right way. It wasn't a balanced perspective. It was presented primarily with archival documents, which the information was not untrue, but it wasn't a balanced perspective. It was very empty and lacked a human perspective. They were very just filed reports. Whereas giving the people a voice, both Navajo and Mescalero Apache, it allows people to talk about this in a safe way. Because there's been a long-standing notion that you don't talk about this history. When you talk about it, it's like opening the door and welcoming it to come back upon the people, this hardship. But I think as a result of that, there's been this residual trauma that's been affecting the people still to this day. I mean, when you think about what the treaty represents, some of the main stipulations of that treaty, you've got Article 2, which talks about boundaries. They got to return to their homeland, but they had to remain in a box. So that was part of residual trauma. And then, the people had to remain at peace with others. And Article 6 talks about going to school. They had to attend U.S. schools, which Chief Barboncito saw as a good thing when he was observing it here, because the kids were learning English, they were learning how to interact with people. But how it was implemented later in time really came back to hurt the people. The idea was, we look at Carlisle Indian School, kill the Indian, save the man was the mentality. So kill the culture. So in kind of a roundabout way, and coming back to that, giving people a platform, giving people a voice, whether you're talking in Navajo or Mescalero, however you want to tell your story is what is important. And no matter how hard it is, the truth is what needs to be told.
So that being said, do you think modern day history books actually tell the real story of what happened in Bosque Redondo? Because I'm a native New Mexican, and I took New Mexico history my freshman year. And the story of Bosque Redondo was half a page long. There was never any significance to it. It was just, the Navajo Long Walk, this and that happened. There's 3 treaties signed, 2 are in, 2 are here. We don't know where the third one is, and that's about it. But they never really talked about the oral history, the stories, the trauma, the tragedy that came with it. How do you compensate for something like that?
I think we're coming to realize now who in this history has the power. It's not us. We are keepers of the history, the power lies in the people. But it's not for us to say that, well, you need to share your story. It has to be on their own accord. But I think where we can compensate for that is through the telling of this history in the best way that we can with what's available. And in doing that, the way we've been working now, we've actually got a pretty strong partnership with both the Navajo Nation and the Mescalero Apache tribe. It's taken many years to forge this new relationship, and we want to do what is right for the people. They are the people that we serve. And this new partnership, we've been creating this new exhibit that we're actually sitting in right now. It's one of several rooms that will be completed beginning in 2019 through this new partnership. They have been with us every step of the way, because I think the problem that we've had in the past has not been on their behalf, it's been on ours. We create things, and then we talk to them after the fact. They say, well, we say, what do you think of this? Do you like this idea? Whereas now, they are sitting with us at the table, designing these ideas, coming up with these programs together as a true partnership. So I think that's where the change has actually taken place. And I feel as though we actually have a partnership now. And the information now is flowing, and there's really no stopping what is to come.
So this summer was the 150th anniversary. Can you tell us a little bit about what went on during the memorial?
We had quite a few festivities. So many to remember. But part of what we were trying to do was bring both cultures together, because even though this was a treaty for the Navajo Nation, it did impact the Mescalero Apache tribe as well, because it was the end of the Bosque Redondo Reservation. So we tried to be inclusive of both tribes, both nations, to make sure that both voices were heard. And some of the things that we were doing, we had some cultural dances that were taking place on the actual day of the commemoration. So we had Sean Price and the Dinetah dancers come out with his dance troupe. And Sean has been coming here for many, many years. This place is a very special place in his heart, because he said, when he comes, he has blessings for the staff, because, he knows that this is a very heavy history to carry. So he wants to promote all of the good feelings that the tribe has towards the staff here, that, we carry this history with us, but we do so in such a good way. So a lot of what he does for us is he gives us our blessings through corn pollen path, but he also has several dances that he was just sharing, not necessarily specific to the day, but a lot of dances that reflect the culture in general. Certain dances that there's certain corn dances that take place, and there's a lot of dances that take place that are social dances. So, like I said, Sean has been coming out here for many years to share the culture. It's not a closed environment. Sean is very much a proponent of sharing what the culture has to offer the people. And the Mescalero Apache also were doing a social dance as well, and they actually invite the visitors to come dance with them. So, and I think both cultures kind of complement each other. Both have round dances that they participate in. So the Mescalero Apache were doing some war dances, but they were also doing a round dance as well. Again, it's just exposing the people to the culture and inviting them in. Mescalero Apache have several ceremonies that are open to the public year-round. You can actually experience a puberty ceremony if you so choose. They're very public about how their culture functions.
Well, Erin, I want to thank you for sitting down with us today and opening your doors to this beautiful memorial. We wish you nothing but the best, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you for watching Cultura. Yo soy Bianca Solís y los vemos la próxima vez.